He works night shifts, no stable home for a child, my ex-wife's mother Constance testified from the witness stand, dabbing her eyes with practiced grief. My daughter has sacrificed everything to raise that little girl while he disappears at all hours, coming home smelling of exhaustion and whatever happens in those dark places. What kind of father works when his child is sleeping? What kind of home can he possibly provide? My ex-wife Melissa nodded tearfully beside her attorney, and Judge Patterson's expression shifted to visible concern as she absorbed the portrait of an absent, unstable father. But why did I sit silently through this theatrical performance, and why did my lawyer Patricia Martinez stand with an expression that suggested Constance had just made a catastrophic error? Your Honor, I need to clarify something about my client's night shifts. Constance sniffed dismissively. He's admitted he works nights. That's all the court needs to know. My client's night shifts are hospital rounds at St. Luke's Medical Center. He's not a factory worker or a security guard. Patricia paused for effect. Dr. Marcus Thompson is the chief of surgery. He is responsible for a department of 47 surgeons and oversees trauma care for one of the busiest hospitals in the state. The courtroom went absolutely silent. Judge Patterson's concerned expression transformed into something sharper. Mrs. Whitmore, she addressed Constance, were you aware of Dr. Thompson's professional position when you prepared your testimony? Constance's face had gone pale. Melissa told me he works odd hours, that wasn't my question. Were you aware he's the chief of surgery? The silence answered for her. My marriage to Melissa had lasted 7 years. We'd met during my residency, when I was working impossible hours and been the sympathetic girlfriend who understood, or claimed to understand, that medicine demanded sacrifice. She'd supported me through the brutal years of training, celebrated my fellowship appointment, stood beside me at the ceremony where I became the youngest chief of surgery in St. Luke's history at 38. Then she'd met David. David was a real estate developer, flexible hours, substantial income, the kind of availability that a surgeon could never provide. Their affair had lasted 18 months before I discovered it. By then, our daughter Sophie was 4 years old and had no idea her family was about to collapse. The divorce had been brutal but manageable. We'd agreed to joint custody, alternating weeks, maintaining stability for Sophie. I'd adjusted my hospital schedule as much as possible, hired a live-in nanny for the nights I was on call, built a life that balanced fatherhood with the demands of running a surgical department. Then Melissa had decided she wanted full custody. The custody modification request came 6 months ago. Melissa and David were getting married. They wanted to relocate to California, where David had a new development project. They wanted to take Sophie with them. They wanted to reduce my visitation to holidays and summer weeks. It's better for Sophie, Melissa had explained. Stability. A real family unit. David can be there for her every day, not just when your schedule allows. I'm her father. You're a father who works 70-hour weeks. Who gets called to the hospital at 2 a.m. Who misses school plays because someone's having a heart attack. She'd shrugged. Sophie deserves more than that. Sophie deserves both her parents. Sophie deserves a parent who's actually present. You can visit whenever you want. The conversation had ended there. The attorneys had taken over. Constance Whitmore had been orchestrating the campaign against me for months. My mother-in-law, soon-to-be ex-mother-in-law, had never approved of me. She'd wanted Melissa to marry someone from their social circle, someone with inherited wealth and country club connections rather than a surgeon who'd grown up in a working-class family and earned everything through merit. He'll never fit in, she told Melissa before our wedding. Doctors are servants, ultimately. They work for other people. We don't marry the help. She'd spent 7 years cataloging my inadequacies. The times I missed family dinners because of emergency surgeries. The holidays interrupted by trauma calls. The school events I'd had to skip because someone's life was hanging in the balance. In Constance's narrative, I was a dedicated physician balancing impossible responsibilities. I was an absent father who chose work over his child. The custody hearing was her opportunity to make that narrative official. The witness testimony had been carefully choreographed. First, Melissa's sister had testified about my unavailability at family gatherings. Then a family friend had described seeing Sophie sad and confused when I was called away for emergencies. Then Melissa herself had wept about doing everything alone while I prioritized strangers over our daughter. Constance's testimony was supposed to be the finale, the concerned grandmother describing an unstable father who worked mysterious night shifts and couldn't provide a proper home. They'd clearly coached their witnesses to emphasize my work hours without mentioning my actual profession. The word doctor hadn't appeared in any testimony. Neither had hospital, surgery, or patients. They'd reduced my career to night shifts and odd hours, painting me as some kind of blue-collar worker with an unreliable schedule rather than one of the most respected surgeons in the state. They'd assumed the court wouldn't look deeper. They'd badly miscalculated. Patricia Martinez had prepared for exactly this moment. Your Honor, I'd like to submit character witnesses and professional documentation that provides context for my client's work schedule. Proceed. The first witness was Dr. Elizabeth Okonkwo, the hospital's chief medical officer. Dr. Thompson is one of the finest surgeons I've worked with in 30 years of medicine. His night shifts aren't avoidable scheduling, they're leadership responsibilities. As chief of surgery, he oversees trauma cases, mentors residents, and handles the most complex cases that come through our doors. Is he frequently absent from his duties? Absent? Dr. Okonkwo actually laughed. Dr. Thompson restructured his entire schedule to maximize time with his daughter. He takes fewer overnight calls than any previous chief of surgery. He's arranged for backup coverage to attend school events. The man has probably sacrificed career advancement to be a present father. The next witness was Sophie's pediatrician. I've been Sophie's doctor since birth. In 7 years, I have never seen a more involved father. Dr. Thompson attends every wellness visit, every sick appointment. He asks detailed questions about her development. He's the parent who calls after hours when he's worried about a fever or a rash. Is that unusual? Extremely. In my experience, fathers with demanding careers often delegate medical decisions to mothers. Dr. Thompson is the opposite. He's not just present, he's informed, engaged, and completely devoted. The character evidence continued for 2 hours. Sophie's teachers described a father who attended every parent-teacher conference, who volunteered for field trips when his schedule allowed, who sent emails asking about her progress. The live-in nanny testified about Dr. Thompson's nightly routines, reading stories, checking homework, never leaving for the hospital without tucking his daughter in first. Colleagues described a surgeon who had turned down prestigious positions because they would have required relocation or increased travel. Patients submitted letters describing how Dr. Thompson had saved their lives, their children's lives, their parents' lives. One letter came from a woman whose son had been in a car accident at 3 a.m. Dr. Thompson left his warm bed to operate on my child for 6 hours. He saved my son's life. Then he went home and took his own daughter to school. That's not an absent father, that's a hero who also happens to be a dad. By the time Patricia finished presenting evidence, the courtroom's atmosphere had transformed completely. Judge Patterson addressed Constance directly. Mrs. Whitmore, I want to understand something. Your testimony characterized Dr. Thompson's work as night shifts without mentioning he's a surgeon. Was that deliberate? Constance shifted uncomfortably. I was describing his schedule, not his job. You described him as someone who disappears at all hours and works when his child is sleeping. You implied instability. You suggested he couldn't provide a proper home. The judge's voice had gone cold. Did you understand that he's the chief of surgery at one of the region's premier hospitals? His work still keeps him away. That wasn't my question. Did you know what he actually does for a living? Yes. So you deliberately mischaracterized his profession to make him appear unsuitable as a parent? Constance's attorney tried to intervene. Your Honor, my client was simply describing. Your client was attempting to manipulate this court by presenting misleading testimony. That's perjury at worst and contempt at best. The ruling came after a 2-hour recess. Judge Patterson's decision was comprehensive and devastating to Melissa's case. The petitioner has requested full custody based on claims that the respondent's work schedule creates an unstable environment. The evidence presented by the petitioner was deliberately misleading, characterizing Dr. Thompson's distinguished medical career as problematic night shifts without professional context. She turned to face Melissa directly. I've reviewed the documentation from both parties. Dr. Thompson has restructured his professional responsibilities specifically to maximize time with his daughter. He employs qualified childcare for periods when his presence is required at the hospital. He attends school events, medical appointments, and extracurricular activities at rates exceeding many parents with flexible schedules. More importantly, every independent witness, teachers, doctors, colleagues, describes him as an exemplary father. The only witnesses who characterized him negatively are family members of the petitioner, whose testimony I find significantly compromised by bias and, in Mrs. Whitmore's case, deliberate misrepresentation. The judge's ruling continued. The petitioner's request for full custody and relocation is denied. The current joint custody arrangement will continue. Melissa's face crumpled. Her attorney whispered urgently. Furthermore, Judge Patterson added, I'm referring Mrs. Whitmore's testimony for review regarding potential perjury. Deliberately misleading a court about material facts in a custody proceeding is extremely serious. Constance went white. Finally, I want to address the underlying issue directly. The petitioner seems to believe that a father who works demanding hours cannot be a good parent. The evidence shows the opposite. Dr. Thompson has made extraordinary efforts to balance his responsibilities as a surgeon with his responsibilities as a father. Rather than being an absent parent, he appears to be teaching his daughter valuable lessons about commitment, sacrifice, and the importance of work that helps others. She looked at me for the first time with something approaching warmth. Dr. Thompson, this court recognizes your dedication to both your profession and your child. Your custody arrangement will remain unchanged. The aftermath was complicated. Melissa's attempt to take Sophie to California had failed completely. More than failed, it had exposed her family's willingness to lie and manipulate to achieve their goals. The judge referred my mother for perjury investigation, Melissa said during our first post-hearing conversation. She could face charges. She deliberately misled the court. What did she expect? She expected to win. She always expects to win. Melissa paused. I didn't know she was going to characterize your work that way. I thought she was just going to talk about your schedule. Would it have mattered? You knew what she was doing. You knew she was painting me as an absent father. I thought if I had full custody, it would be easier. For Sophie. For me. For everyone. It would have been easier for you. It would have devastated Sophie to lose her father. Sophie was 7 years old, and she understood more than either of us had given her credit for. Mommy said we might move to California, she told me during my next custody week. She said I'd only see you on holidays. How did that make you feel? Sad. Really sad. She looked up at me with her mother's eyes but my determination. I don't want to only see you on holidays. You're my dad. I'm always going to be your dad. No matter what. Grandma Constance told the judge you work too much. That you're not a good dad because you're not home enough. What do you think? Am I home enough? Sophie considered the question with the seriousness of a child who has been forced to think about adult problems. You're home when it matters. You come to my school plays even when you're tired. You read to me every night even when you have to go to the hospital after. She hugged me tightly. You save people's lives, Dad. That's important. But you always come home to me. That's important too. The perjury investigation against Constance lasted 3 months. She wasn't charged. The prosecutor determined that proving intentional deception beyond reasonable doubt would be difficult. But she received a formal warning, and the family court flagged her testimony as unreliable for any future proceedings. The damage to her reputation was substantial. In her social circles, where appearances mattered enormously, being publicly called out for misleading a court was devastating. You've humiliated our family, she told Melissa, according to what my daughter later reported. You humiliated yourself, Mother. You told a judge that Marcus works night shifts like he's a security guard. He's the chief of surgery. Everyone knows that now. Everyone knows you lied. Their relationship never fully recovered. Melissa's relationship with David eventually ended. The California relocation happened anyway, for David, without Melissa. Whatever future they'd imagined had been contingent on having Sophie as part of their family unit. Without that, the relationship couldn't sustain itself. I gave up everything for him, Melissa told me bitterly, 2 years after the hearing. My marriage, my family's reputation, my relationship with my mother. And he left anyway. You gave up those things for custody. For control. David was just the excuse. Maybe. She looked tired, older than her years. I thought if I had Sophie full-time, I could start over completely. New city, new husband, new life. But I would have been taking her away from you, and she would have resented me eventually. Probably. The judge was right. You're a good father. I was just too angry to see it. The custody arrangement has remained stable for 4 years now. Sophie is 11, brilliant and curious, interested in science and medicine, whether from my influence or her own inclinations, I'm not sure. She spends equal time with both parents, has adjusted to our complicated family structure, and seems to be thriving despite the chaos of her earlier years. Dad, when you operate on someone, do you ever think about their kids? She asked recently. All the time. Every patient is someone's parent, someone's child, someone's sibling. That's why I work so hard to save them. Grandma Constance said you care more about your patients than about me. What do you think? I think she doesn't understand that caring about patients and caring about me aren't opposites. You can do both. That's exactly right. Also, I think Grandma Constance says a lot of things that aren't true. I couldn't argue with that. The professional recognition has continued. Last year, I was offered the position of Chief Medical Officer at a hospital system in another state, a significant promotion, considerable prestige, the kind of career advancement that most surgeons dream about. I turned it down. The position would have required relocation, would have taken me away from Sophie, would have transformed my role from practicing surgeon to administrator. The career benefits couldn't outweigh what I would have lost. You gave up CMO for joint custody? A colleague asked incredulously. I gave up CMO for my daughter. The custody arrangement is just the legal structure. What I'm actually protecting is the relationship. Most people would have taken the job and modified their custody agreement. Most people haven't had to fight in court to keep that agreement. When you've nearly lost something, you understand its value. Constance never apologized. She maintained, until her death last year, that her testimony had been misinterpreted rather than deliberately misleading. She never acknowledged that calling my work night shifts without mentioning I was a surgeon had been calculated to damage my custody case. I attended her funeral, briefly, for Sophie's sake. My daughter had maintained a relationship with her grandmother despite everything. Children are more forgiving than adults, or perhaps just more practical. Grandma was complicated, Sophie said afterward. Most people are. She never liked you. But I think, at the end, she respected you. Why do you think that? Because she stopped trying to convince me you were a bad father. In the last year, she never said anything negative about you. I think she finally realized it wasn't working. The night shifts continue. I still take calls, still rush to the hospital when trauma cases arrive, still operate at 3 a.m. when someone's life hangs in the balance. That will never change. It's who I am, what I've dedicated my life to becoming. But I've also learned that being present doesn't mean being physically available every moment. It means showing up when it matters. It means prioritizing the important over the urgent. It means building a life that honors both commitments, to the patients who need my skills and to the daughter who needs her father. He works night shifts, no stable home for a child. Those words were meant to destroy me. Instead, they revealed everything about the people who spoke them, their assumptions, their prejudices, their willingness to manipulate the truth to get what they wanted. The chief of surgery does work nights. He also reads bedtime stories, attends school plays, and has never missed a moment that truly mattered to his daughter. That's not an unstable home. That's a father who figured out how to be present in the ways that count. They characterized my career as night shifts to make me seem unsuitable. They painted me as absent, unstable, unreliable, a father who chose work over his child. They never mentioned that the work was saving lives, that the night shifts were hospital rounds, that the exhaustion was from keeping people alive. The chief of surgery. That's what I am. That's what they tried to hide from the court. But the truth doesn't stay hidden forever. The judge saw through their manipulation. The evidence showed who I really am. And my daughter, the person who matters most, has always known that her father loves her more than anything in the world, even when that love has to share space with a surgical schedule. They called me an absent father. The court called me exemplary. Sophie just calls me Dad. That's the only title that matters.